Thank you, Acting Deputy President. I'm speaking today to acknowledge the Governor-General David Hurley ACDSC's address to the 47th Parliament. His Excellency addressed this chamber in July 2022 to mark the beginning of a new parliament and to outline the Albanese Labor government's plans. It's been 8 months since the Albanese government took power, but what do we have to show for that 8 months? The cost of living is biting more than ever, and inflation is the highest it has been in 33 years. It's a struggle to do the weekly shop, to pay for school uniforms and fees as the school year begins, and to put petrol in our cars. Reducing the cost of living for Australians is well and truly overdue. Each day, households and small businesses are forced to suffer further. That is a day too long. Another anticipated interest rate on Tuesday, tomorrow, will be the 10th rate rise in 12 months, with still more to come, so we're told. When questioned about how a typical Australian home mortgage has risen by $1,400 a month, the Prime Minister didn't address the issue at hand, instead once again looking to lay blame elsewhere. The 800,000 people who are facing mortgage cost hikes when their fixed rates switch to a higher variable rate this year want action to ensure that they can keep their homes. But Anthony Albanese was more interested in talking about prescription drugs, TAFE, childcare and his May budget. Hundreds of thousands of Australians are wondering whether they will have a roof over their heads in May, but the cost of living predicament our nation faces right now is the last thing on Labor's mind. The Senate Select Committee on the Cost of Living, which was established in September and is being chaired by Liberal Senator Jane Hume, has already heard that higher grocery prices and rising mortgages are leaving families struggling to put food on the table. Uniting Victoria Tas Chief Executive Officer Bronwyn Pike wrote about how the organisation's consumers were experiencing increasing levels of poverty, homelessness, food insecurity and violence due to the devastating impact of the rising cost of living. Uniting Vic Tas's research report, Can't Afford to Live, showed 92% of respondents were cutting back on food and groceries due to rising costs. Half of respondents cut back on heating during winter last year, and parents, carers and people living with disability were skipping meals, all the while preparing food for others. As Senator Hume has said, Labor don't have an economic plan. They've abandoned finding solutions to this crisis, and instead they're breaking promises to families and breaking promises to businesses. Cost of living is the top issue facing Australians right now. The government should be developing practical solutions that will make a difference to the lives of ordinary Australians who are struggling. That frequently promised $275 cut to energy bills is sorely needed but hasn't eventuated. Instead, Parliament was recalled in a rush and at a busy time right before Christmas to address urgent energy legislation. Instead of spending time in our electorates participating in end-of-year school events and boosting and supporting small businesses in the lead-up to Christmas, hundreds of politicians and staff had to return to Canberra for a hastily reconvened sitting to discuss energy measures. And to what end? That legislation we all rushed back to Canberra for in December has had no impact to date. Right now we need a federal government that we can trust to look after all of us when times are tough, but that is not what we have. We have a government that promised reforms that would actually make a difference to healthcare and Medicare, but that commitment has failed as well. With bulk billing rates so low, Australians are now out of pocket by $60 on average when they visit their GP, and that's if they can get in to see one. This Labor government was elected on a platform of strengthening Medicare, but all we've seen is the Medicare system weaken. Mental health rebates have been slashed in half, 70 telehealth services have been cut out of Medicare coverage, ambulance ramping at our hospitals is getting worse, elective surgery is being deferred at concerning levels, and what about those urgent care clinics we were all promised? Where are they? It's time for tangible action to improve our ailing healthcare system, Labor. You promised to deliver 50 urgent care clinics across the country, including 3 in my home state of Tasmania, within the first 12 months of government. Given we are now more than 2/3 through that first 12 months, shouldn't we have seen more progress by now? Instead of being well on the way through establishing these clinics, all that has happened is that expressions of interest for about 3 have been requested. I and my coalition colleagues intend to hold the Albanese government to account when it comes to delivering on the commitments they made during that and since the election campaign. When he launched Labor's election campaign, Mr Albanese promised to tackle the spiralling cost of living that is making life tough for too many Australians. There were commitments to raise real wages, to make healthcare, childcare and housing more affordable while growing the economy, to strengthen Medicare, to create more jobs and invest in fee-free TAFE and university places, as well as invest in manufacturing and renewable energy. This all sounded great at the time, Prime Minister, but as we've already seen, this government has already reneged on many of its promises. In the 2 years before the 2022 election, power prices fell by 8% for households and up to 12% for businesses. The ACCC said prices were the lowest they had been for 8 years. Mr Albanese flagged energy price cuts of up to $275 a year for families and businesses by 2025, but in fact, our energy bills are rising and look set to continue escalating. Even Labor's much-hyped submission to the Fair Work Commission to lift the minimum wage was swallowed up by inflation. In this submission, the Albanese government explained it did not want to see Australian workers go backwards, in particular those workers on low rates of pay who are experiencing the worst impacts of inflation and have the least capacity to draw on savings. However, inflation has continued to rise over the past 8 months with no relief in sight, and real wages have actually decreased. The economic growth Australia was experiencing under the Coalition has come to an end, and that is hurting hard-working Australians. To add salt to the wound, the government stifled growth in some of our key industries by freezing hard-earned grants. Grants like the Modern Manufacturing Initiative that were already awarded before the election were held up. Important industries that we rely on every day, such as defence, space, medical, food security and heavy manufacturing, were all impacted by their decision. The Coalition knows the value of primary industries in Australia. Our government invested in trade and exports, biosecurity, stewardship, supply chains, water and infrastructure, innovation and research and human capital to support the important agriculture, fisheries and forestry industries. But Minister Watt delayed taking action to ensure Australia's $81 billion agricultural industry was protected and not unduly impacted by foot and mouth disease. It really has not been a good start for this government. Mr Albanese said he wanted his government to be one that was more inclusive and delivered more solutions. He campaigned on the idea of a future where no one is held back and no one is left behind. But can we already see that, as we can already see, those words are tarnished? The Coalition's focus is to support good policy that is in the best interest of Australia, and we will hold the government to account when it breaches its commitments. We will oppose actions that take our economy backwards and force inflation rates even higher. The Coalition will ensure we're backing families and small businesses doing it tough under Labor's cost of living crisis. We had a strong record in government of lower prices, lower interest rates, lower unemployment, lower taxes and stronger borders, and we're proud of this. The Albanese government is nearly 1 year into their 3-year term and has very little to show for it, apart from broken promises, increased cost of living, increased interest rates and increased inflation. Thank you.